minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey everybody, what's good? You are now tapped into the coolest reptile podcast in the world, the Trap Talk Reptile Network. This is episode 4 of the Girls Who Love Reptiles podcast, going on Sunday nights now. It's really excited to have Laura from Smug on tonight, talk about Bioactive, Enclosure, setting them up, pros and cons, etc. So I think it's going to be a really fantastic episode. So if you haven't already, go on Instagram, give her a follow. She has a lot of awesome content regarding her business side. I think she both breeds geckos as well, so we may touch into that a little bit too. But yeah, really excited. We are 7 days a week now, so if you are new to the channel, make sure you like and subscribe to kind of keep up on everything that the Trap Talk is having on every day of the week. Daytona's coming up this week, so I hope you all are excited for that as well. And we'll go into some sponsors for a little bit. So if you are not already a member of US ARC, go ahead and do that. I just renewed my yearly subscription a couple days ago. So I've been in it for 1 year and I just renewed for another year. So if you haven't, go ahead and do that. Super, super, super important. Really, the numbers are a huge thing, and be able to fight legislation. And US ARC uses our membership money in order to pay for the legislation, to go up against them and fight for our rights. And as we know, in Florida, it's a huge deal with a lot of rules and regulations. And so really need them to kind of be our voice in that standpoint. So if you haven't already, go and become a member of US ARC. Then we have Clutch, the ultimate database for organizing all of your animals and your breedings. I have it for personally my ball pythons, and I know Summer there is working really hard to make this the best that they can do. I know they might be bringing on, maybe adding other species in the future, which I think will be really helpful. Like I said, I use it. I really like the breeding planner part of it. They have where you can put pairings together, and it kind of gives you like a star value on how maybe strong that pairing is, which I find interesting. And I really like how it breaks down which morphs you have in your collection. So I find that really, really helpful on as I'm adding new things, what morphs can I maybe add to give a variety, as it shows which ones I have a higher percentage of. And then we have RGI with shed testing. So it's here, whether you like it or not, but it's an awesome way to just integrate that new technology into our collections, be able maybe to keep a fewer number of animals, be able to work really high-end projects in a really executionary style. So make sure you send your sheds in. And then we have the COCO dudes with the chipper. So if you haven't already, go on his side. If you're getting bedding material for your animals, you can use the code TRAPFAM24 for a percentage off your order. This is the only COCO that I personally will use. I found that I'm allergic to a lot of the other ones. So this one, the one that I buy, already comes pretty chopped up. It's already moist, and I can just go ahead and put it in the animal's enclosure. So if you don't really know where to get your substrate from, definitely go to the chipper. And finally, we have Conduit Constrictors. If you haven't already, go on their Instagram, go ahead and follow them. They are up and coming, the ball python game. They're always bringing some heat, especially in the clown, the DG clown. I met them personally. They're really down to earth, awesome people to meet and talk with. So if you haven't already, go ahead and give them a like and on Instagram. I think they have a YouTube channel too, so go ahead and look them up on YouTube and subscribe for what they have going on there. And then it's me. So I wanted to say hello to the live comments here, see who's tapped in. If you tell us a little different, I met with MJ this past week, got new updated my lighting, and I got the mic all set up, so hopefully you guys can hear me really well, make it a little more just professional. So I'm excited to make improvements in that standpoint. So we have Brian here from Heathen Hatchery. Says he's got to go to bed, but he'll be on the replay game at 3 a.m. Comes quick. Sure does. So sorry for you having to get up so early. We have Nick from the Reptile Pueblo. What's up, Trap fam? Hey, Nick. We have Travis from Tina's Reptiles. Hey, Travis, how's it going? Boza, what's up? Wistang fam. We have Mike Duvall from MORPH Avenue. Thanks for tapping in. Listening on the road, headed north in northern Indiana. Cool. Fun fact. I'm from Indiana, actually. I don't know if I said that in my first podcast, but that's where I'm from. I'm in Missouri now, but that's where I grew up. So probably maybe heading towards maybe in Fort Wayne area, maybe. Reptifari, happy Sunday, fam. Hello. Thanks for joining in. My Snake Edition. Awesome. How are you doing? We got, let's see here. Hooked on Geckos. Hey, thanks for joining in. Matt, how are you? Trappers. Serenity Dragons. Thanks for being here. Earthborn Exotics. Enters. Cool. Yes, we are the cool. Like I said, the coolest reptile podcast. We have the coolest intro too. Medusa Complex. So excited. Oh, I'm so excited you guys are here. Hello from Nebraska. Nicole. Awesome. Not too far from me. Greg, thanks for tapping in. Nice to see you. We got Ben. So excited, Laura. Oh, but that's her husband. Awesome. And then we got Aurora Exotics. Awesome. I know some of you guys are also going to be tapping in, but thanks for being here. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to bring Laura up on the stage. Hey, Laura.
Hi.
Playing with the pups.
That's what they're here for. Look at her. She's like, why did it stop?
Yeah, I have 2 pups of my own, and I've locked them out.
I love them.
How's it going? How's your weekend been going?
Good. It's been a really good weekend. It was really nice here, so we took the kids out all weekend, and we went down by the river, and we looked for rocks, and my 6-year-old was very upset we wouldn't let her put her feet in the river because it was yucky.
How many kids you have?
4.
4. Wow. Okay, and you do this kind of full time, or is this? Wow. Okay, 4 kids.
Yeah, I was initially going to school to be an accountant, and then I got pregnant with twins the weekend I got married, and then I had to drop out of school. And so I was just kind of a stay-at-home mom because daycare is going to cost us minimum $1,200 up to $2,000 because in this area it's hard to get and it's expensive. So I was just a stay-at-home mom because I was making maybe $2,000 a month as a CNA. And I was just taking pictures of my babies and my bugs. And I was really good at taking pictures of bugs and making bugs. And I just kept making more, selling more. People were contacting me for them, and it's just grown into this over the past 6 years.
So, okay, cool. What got you into like the bugs and the reptile scene? Like to begin, is that something you always were into, or?
My family, especially on my dad's side, has a lot of asthma, and so we couldn't have a lot of the mammals that most people would typically have because everyone was allergic. My brother especially had a lot of health issues with hair and the dander that comes with it. And with reptiles and other exotics, you don't really have those problems.
Right.
Family has always had a lot of interest in nature and animals and stuff like that. And so since we couldn't have like furry pets, my dad would really help us set up reptiles and stuff like that. He would do the full biome. We used to go out and catch like little toads, and he would let us keep them for the summer, and then we have to let them go.
Same, I did that with my dad. We'd go in the woods and I would hunt box turtles and I would keep them for a little bit and then release them. So yeah.
We went to Minnesota, and there are native tree frogs in Minnesota.
Huh.
So we caught two at a campground and brought them home for the summer. And then my dad gave them to the zoo because we couldn't let them go in North Dakota, obviously.
Where are you from? Like in the
I'm
country?
from North Dakota.
North Dakota. Wow. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Never been there. By her IC, it's pretty and stuff like that. So, which
It's
town?
mostly flat. Bismarck.
Oh, Bismarck. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Very cool. That's awesome. And is the reptile like a big kind of market there? And
No.
Isopods? No, you probably, I'm sure you ship.
It's all online. Yeah.
Okay.
People around here keep saying, I had no idea you were here. And it's like, because I don't advertise here.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the community. I love everybody here. They're not the people I cater to because, and I say this with love, it's a bunch of cheap Germans. We get a lot of, why should I take this if I could find it outside? I'm like, if you want to go find it outside, that's how I started. Go right ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you have trouble getting going, I'm right here, but I'm not going to argue with you.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And there's probably no like shows there either.
There is one show in Fargo once a year.
Okay. How long is that?
Otherwise, the rest of the year we travel to Minnesota for shows.
Oh, okay. Okay. How far is the Fargo? From you?
It's about 3 hours from me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's right on the border between North Dakota and Minnesota.
Okay. So your online presence is pretty much, have to have that. There's no kind of shows around here like that. Okay.
We have maybe a total of 10 local sales a year.
Wow.
But I don't advertise to the community at all, really.
Okay. What are some, I guess, tips you've kind of learned over the years on marketing yourself online? Is it mainly like your social media, or
it is genuinely quantity over quality?
Okay.
Because I have the weirdest post takeoff I did not expect to take off. And I've kind of fallen back the last 2 months. I kind of fell behind with the shows we were doing because we did Schaumburg and I was gone for a week. And then we were having some childcare issues. And whenever we don't have like reliable childcare, it's always me because my husband can't take the time off work. But otherwise, typically what I do is I post a short video every day. So like a reel. It's called like a reel, a TikTok, wherever, depending on which platform you're on. I guess on YouTube they call it shorts. But I post a reel every day about something random related to the business. Sometimes it's more professional. Sometimes it's just a clip we got that day. Doesn't matter. Sometimes the really professional ones take off. Very rarely do they take off. Usually it's something weird we caught off guard. Like an animal that didn't come all the way out of its egg. Like that 5-second reel got 600,000 views one year.
Wow.
Then I post an image or discussion of a reptile. So for the most part with me, it's been crested geckos because that's the majority of what we produce. And then I do an image or discussion of an isopod. And then I try to do a meme every day, but those take a lot of time to produce for me. So sometimes I'll sit down and I'll just make 20 at once. And so I'm good for 20 days, but then I have to like get the energy, the creativity back to keep making those. But I've had a lot of weird memes take off too.
I've recently followed and I have been seeing them on my posts, and I think they're hilarious. But I think
there's a lot of really unhinged ones lately because I was really tired when I made this last batch.
Yep. I think they're funny, but I've heard in other groups that a good way to do it is kind of batch doing it. That way it just makes it kind of easier, especially if you're not one that really likes posting stuff. I find myself like that too.
Yeah, you can even schedule the videos, but they have to be under 1 minute and 30 seconds for reels. But you can schedule those a month ahead of time.
You can schedule them. I didn't know that. You can schedule reels.
Yes, that's been in the last 2 months. They finally enabled that, and it's in the business suite is what they call it. But I believe you can do it on both TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook now. TikTok doesn't buddy with the other ones, but it's translatable. You know what I mean?
Okay. I'll have to look into that myself. I never knew that. You could schedule them. Interesting. I think that would help a lot of people out too. So
the best part is if you can post something people want to argue about, because then people are arguing in the comments, and then the platform really likes that because you're causing engagement and it boosts you more.
Smart.
I'll get so many followers when I post something people are arguing about.
Like in the reptile world, or something completely different?
Well, like one time I had a video of my snake and she had crawled through my shirt, and we were getting ready to give her like a brief soak or a bath. And I mentioned we'll put a small amount of Dawn dish soap in there to try and get the urates off of her before we put her back in because she was really coated in it. And there were so many people telling me I was going to kill her with the Dawn dish soap.
Really?
Just going at it in the comments.
Oh my. Huh. I would have never thought that.
I mean, even if it's bad engagement, it's engagement.
Hey, I mean, that's true. And it's not like you're, for exactly one side or the other type thing. I mean, you're already using the Dawn dish soap, I guess, but still, yeah, I can see how. Interesting. Never would have thought that, but that's a good idea. I'm gonna start. My wheels are turning. I'm like, what can I do? That's
the hidden thing. If you can post a relatively benign post that people will argue about, it blows up. There was one of my memes got, I think, 400 to 500,000 views. Okay. It was a man in a car. I don't know if you remember this meme, like 20s style comic book, driving, and she says, "I hate something." And in this instance, I put her saying, "I hate isopods." And then in the next frame, it shows her on the side of the road, him with an isopod in the passenger seat, grinning and smiling. And so many people are like, "This is disgusting. How could you prefer a bug over a woman?" It's like, it's a meme. It's not that serious.
People on the internet take stuff super seriously. So, So tell us a little bit about the business. I think. Well, I've seen you talked about breeding geckos, but what's, the bioactive part? Kind of talk about
I incorporated geckos just because I liked them and I wanted an excuse to have more. The main portion of my business is the isopods. That's where we make all of our money. That's where we get the majority of our customers. Isopods really came into popularity. They were just starting to really get big before I got into it 10 years ago. So I'd say about 15 years ago, people really started pushing them. And initially, they became really popular with the frog and amphibian crowd, microgeckos, because the dwarf species were very useful for feeding froglets and dart frogs, stuff like that. And so the dart frog people are really the ones who brought it in initially. So we really had Trichorhema tormentosa, which is the dwarf white isopod, and then Procellonites pyrenosus, which is commonly known as powder blue.
Okay.
By the time I got in about 10 years ago, people were bringing in the rarer stuff from Spain that were like really large and kind of marketing them as pets. But mostly people were getting into it for the bioactive portion. Okay. And isopods are kind of like the heavy lifters of bio because they break down the waste you see. They break down all of the animal sheds. They break down all of the animal waste. They are such good composters that if you were to offer them a pinky or a mouse that a snake has rejected, they will not only eat all of the flesh, they will eat all of the hairs, and they will eat all the tendons and ligaments. And then you start seeing them not only take away the smaller bones into their burrows, they break down and chew through the larger bones. They will completely decimate a small-bodied skeleton in a matter of weeks.
Is it just like is it something in their mouth allows them to break that down, or their GI system?
Well, they're more driven than insects. So the reason that isopods are not used to clean skeletons like domestic beetles are is because domestic beetles have a protein base to their exoskeleton. So they use protein. Chitin is the one that I believe the majority of them are based on. So they mostly just eat the protein and they leave the bones. Isopods have a calcium base to their skeleton, and they use the protein for the females to develop babies and then to grow into adults. And so their biology drives them to devour calcium just for their own growth. They do have mouth parts. I forget the exact name for them. I believe that most insects would be able to carve out the skeleton if they wanted to. The isopods are a crustacean, so once they reach their adult mold, their mouth parts do break down over time, but they have a biological need to ingest and collect calcium. Okay, that makes sense too. They're more likely to go after the bones than something that doesn't really actually need it for their skeleton. So, okay. I haven't read any evidence of domestic beetle larvae because it's the larvae, not the actual beetles, that eat the flesh. Carving out the skeletons, which is why they're really popular in taxidermy and preservation and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've
So
seen
don't use isopods if you want to strip a skeleton. It's a bad idea. If you want to strip a skeleton, it's a bad idea. Peel parts away.
Yeah, the CSI people would not want to use that because that's what I learned about the beetle part of it. They kind of use that for the CSI, learning how fast something decomposes to kind of figure out when that person died or whatever. Interesting. How many species of isopods are there total? I don't know if you mentioned it. Maybe I missed it, but
in the world there are thousands.
Thousands. Okay.
So I used to know the exact number off the top of my head, but I'm not sure now. Especially in Southeast Asia, people are exploring more and finding more species that are undescribed.
Mm-hmm.
In my possession, we have about 200 species.
Wow.
In Europe, a lot of the species that we have here are actually not native here. They are introduced species from Britain. In Europe, they have even more species in captivity because people are going out and exploring like the Swiss Alps, the Spanish Alps. They're going into Africa. They're finding weird isopods there. So there's a lot. Like if you go into Hamburg, you'd find so many isopods over there I haven't even seen before. I would guess that there are probably between 300 and 500 in the hobby if we include Europe. In the US, it's between 200 and 300, including the Southeast Asian species that are relatively undescribed.
And is the market kind of all across the board, or do you find like most of the market is centered around a certain amount of species?
The majority of the market is fueled by the cleaner species.
Okay.
There is kind of a niche market that's going after the very expensive ones, but the majority of people that are into isopods are getting the Procellulabus dairy cow, which are the white ones.
I like those. Yeah.
The powder mix people really like because it's just so multi-purpose for bio. The dwarf white specifically. Sometimes people get fancy and they'll get dwarf purples. And then people like the scabers because they come in, I think we have 25 different pattern and color variations. And people just have a lot of fun with the colors, but that's pretty much where it ends. That's the majority of our sellers. I have the giant species just because they're a lot of fun, but honestly, they don't sell very good compared to everything else.
I gotcha. And people who are getting them are really just for their bioactive. And that's what makes some Enclosure bioactive is the actual isopods.
It's the isopods and the other microbiome, which includes springtails and bacteria. But isopods are the real heavy lifters. The springtails and bacteria do introduce themselves. You just have a better time if you introduce it initially yourself.
Okay. And what do the springtails do? They break down?
Springtails, initially, there was a misconception that they ate mold. They do not actually eat mold. They eat things before it molds. So if you don't have springtails, you'll see a lot more incidents of molding. If you do have springtails, you rarely see mold, especially if they're really well populated, because they like that period right before it molds. They just devour it. It's probably because it's broken down so far, it's easier for them to eat.
Okay. And as far as like reptile species, what species would you recommend have a bioactive enclosure, and which ones maybe wouldn't benefit from it?
Things that are kept in temperate or tropical environments. So that is on dirt. Anything that's on dirt, honestly, I would recommend having in bio that has any amount of humidity. The things I cannot recommend isopods for are arid or strictly arid animals because the isopods cannot survive in that. I have told people if they want to do an arid setup, they have to use some sort of beetle. Okay. Dermestid beetles, the adult form of mealworms, is the most popular for that. But anything that is from a tropical environment, a temperate environment, crested geckos is my favorite example of a temperate environment because they're from New Caledonia, which is like to the northwest of Australia, I believe. But it's a bit of a cooler forest. So it's not hot. It's not like a jungle. It's a bit cooler. And most of the geckos are found in like the mid-level, the bush level. So they're really shaded and a lot more cool. Tropical would be like warmer animals, like day geckos would be considered a tropical gecko.
Okay, that makes sense. And maybe not so much would be like your bearded dragons, your leopard geckos, or something like that.
Bearded dragons, I wouldn't consider them strictly arid. I consider them semi-arid, which can be set up in bio, but it's a bit more tricky. The things that absolutely need to be bio, nothing else, would be your amphibians, like dirt frogs.
Mm-hmm.
You can't set them on anything besides something with dirt that's really wet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Crested geckos, it's a lot easier on people, the temperate and tropical animals. It's a lot easier to keep them healthy just because, I mean, the humidity levels in my tanks, I don't even have to mess with them. People always ask me, they're like, well, what's your humidity level? And I'm like, I don't know.
You just missed them a couple times a day, or have a
I miss them every other day.
Every other day. Wow. Okay.
I miss them every other day. And if it's still wet in between mistings, it's too wet. And then we just change out the soil because it got waterlogged. But that happens to maybe 1 or 2 tanks a year out of the 600 animals we have.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. So you have, how many geckos do you have? 600 geckos?
It fluctuates because it's baby season, so a bunch are hatching. I got down to 500, and then we hatched a bunch of babies, so we're back up to 600 again.
That's a lot.
I'd like to be at 300.
Yeah. I can imagine. Then you said 200 or so species of the isopods and
The
springtails.
isopods are pretty stress-free.
Okay. How do you?
You
can go into that. How do you keep isopods and breed them and stuff like that?
So all of these here, these are all isopods.
Okay.
These are the miniature cultures. So these are all about 6 quart tubs. When we get new species or we're isolating a new mutation, this is what we set them up in, the really small tubs. I only check on these once a week and they're fine. I can miss a week, they'll still be totally fine. We have leaves. You need enough leaves. You can't see the dirt. That's how they thrive the best. I have cork bark just because the animals can crawl on the cork bark and it's easier to see them. And of course I grabbed a dwarf species to show so there isn't anybody. There's already springtails all over in here because I have springtails all over the place. You kind of see them crawling all over that. Those are springtails.
I can see them, the little white guys.
Yeah, the little white guys. And then just about half an inch of dirt. And we keep them in this until I tell people to wait to upgrade their isopods until they look uncomfortable. And then we put them in one of these that's back here. This is 25-liter tubs. This is what I call a master culture. Or an underbed storage toad is sometimes what people will call it. Egg crate, monitor population. You can see the isopods on there. Mm-hmm. There aren't as many on here because I harvested them for a demonstration. Mm-hmm. Same thing, but bigger. Layer of leaves. These guys need more leaves. I've kind of eaten them a bit. And then enough dirt that's about half an inch deep. And then these vents I just drilled with a circular hole saw. And these are weed matting that we glued over the side. And it prevents ventilation without the animals escaping.
Okay. What's like so you put them in the smaller, wait till they grow to kind of a number and moving up. What's their like lifespan, and how do you know when to kind of like turn over your colonies?
It does depend on the species. So the ones that I showed in that big bin, those are Priscillionites purinosus, and they have a total population replacement rate of about every 6 weeks because they produce such large brood so frequently. They have, when I was reading papers, average life expectancy of about 2 to 3 years. And those are when you'll see like the really big ones, like, you got an old one then. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the larger species of isopod live up to 10 years or longer.
Oh, wow.
So one of the giant species we have that I keep from Spain, like this is called Procelia hoffmannseggi, and these are from cliff sides of Spain. This guy's pretty cool. So this is an adult male.
Yeah,
he's probably a year or 2 old. I would not be surprised if these guys can live for like a decade. But these only brood twice a year, so they brood seasonally. And the size of their brood depends on the size of the female. So an immature female like a younger female that they'll brood at half this size, but they only do it seasonally, will produce a much smaller brood compared to an adult female that will produce larger broods. But they might only brood once a year.
Okay, so it's really species kind of dependent, it sounds like. Okay.
Well, I mean, it would be like comparing a macaw that lays 2 eggs once a year to a sparrow that'll pump out 4 clutches in a summer.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, they're all birds, but they're very different birds.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good comparison. Same thing with reptiles too. You have ones
Mhm.
that like leopard gecko or crescent gecko, and then you have something more like a, I don't know. I know ball pythons have 1 clutch a year, but some
Oh
others.
yeah, I got crested geckos coming out my ears because those things breed so fast. They're like chickens.
Yeah.
And then I've got my leeches. I've got a female that's tried to kill every male I brought her with, and she's only made a single fertile clutch for me. You know?
Yeah.
They're both geckos. They're both from the same island,
Yeah.
same environment, same diet, completely different reproductive rates.
And is there, when people are trying to grasp on what species they should get, is there like something online they can go and look at where everything's condensed?
I have a blog. It discusses temperate, tropical, semi-arid setups. And then there's also another section specifically for frogs. But a really good blanket is just the powder mix. For Selenites prunosis, the powder mix, and the Springtails, you can put them in pretty much anything and they will live. Because the powder mix is from the British Isles.
Okay.
They're used to a somewhat chilly but humid environment, but they can adapt to almost anything. Because Britain colonized and invaded so many parts of the world, they are literally found on every continent in the world except for Antarctica because it's too cold for isopods to live there.
Yeah, for sure. In the U.S., is it in certain parts of the U.S. like, or is it
Every part of the U.S.
Every part of the U.S. Interesting.
It, like on iNaturalist, in every state of the U.S., there has been prunosis sightings because when Britain colonized the Americas, what they did is they brought over their crops already rooted in dirt, and in the dirt were isopods. So they brought them in dirt to plant them. They brought the isopods with them. They continued to bring their crops and root them across the U.S., and they brought the prunosis with them.
I see. Okay. Easily traveled then, and shipping is pretty easy too. Is it? How does that work?
It's a little more tricky than compared to crickets or roaches because they need to stay moist. Isopods are a modified version of crustaceans, so they need moisture to keep their lungs wet and actually working. I'm going to try and show you on the camera here. Of course, I dropped him. You can actually see their lungs. They're these little white patches on their hind end. Let's see.
Yeah, I can see the white patches.
Yeah. Try to get to focus.
And I'm assuming they inflate, deflate, like.
No, it's like, so you know, fish gill, they have gills.
Yeah.
So those are modified gills. They push water across their gills, and that's how it extracts the oxygen. These guys just need their gills to stay moist, and that is what helps them pull the oxygen out of the air.
I see. That's fascinating.
But if they get dry, their body pulls moisture from their body to keep their lungs moist, and it makes them dry out much more quickly. So roaches and crickets you can ship in just cardboard. A roach can live without moisture for weeks, cricket a couple of days. Isopods will completely dry up in a matter of hours.
Wow. Okay.
So we have to ship them on moist moss.
Okay. Moist moss. Okay. Overnight. And temperature?
I don't even need to ship them overnight. The way I pack them, I put them in like a cup about this size. A smaller culture I'll put in a smaller cup with moist sphagnum moss. And I've had packages returned to me a month later with the animals still alive in them.
Wow.
But they do have to be packed in something moist or they will dry out.
Yeah, something that stays moist. We had one question, which also reminds me, guys, if you have any questions, just put them in the comment and we'll kind of answer them as we go. So the Medusa complex, wonder what makes dairy cows so popular. I noticed it just because of the color and the name, but I'm not sure. I don't have any.
People really love black and white isopods. They just love them.
Just like the color. You think it's the color? I mean, similar like ball python. You have the DG Xanthic clown. That's pretty popular. It's just kind of mind blowing on that you can get something with that stark contrast. So I guess that would make similar. And they're pretty hardy. I think somebody else said too. Yeah, pretty hardy. Okay. Okay. So you think it's just the coloring? Interesting.
Because the wild type of the Lavis, I have it marked cheaper, doesn't sell anywhere near in popularity as the dairy cows. People love black and white things. And I mean, I found this out when I had babies. The black and white contrast makes it very easy for people to see. It's very easy for their brain to register that that thing is different. So because it has such a unique appearance, it's very popular with people.
Makes sense. Well, I know we have a little bit of a demonstration kind of behind you on building a bioactive setup. But kind of go into that. People can ask some more questions as they come in, and we'll kind of go into that.
So in most bios, when the bio movement kind of like started, it was specifically for frogs, because unlike crested geckos, you'll keep them on paper towel and mist them once or twice a day, and they'll be fine. Bearded dragons, a lot of people like keeping them on tile because it wears them down. Give them a water bowl, they'll be fine. With frogs, they need a constant source of moisture because of their skin. So initially, Frogger's developed a bioactive system to keep their frogs healthy and have a much better rate of keeping them. So they had a layering system that they did because they needed so much moisture for their frogs, but they also needed a way to remove the stagnant water. So they'll have a layer of a drainage layer. They'll have a barrier to prevent things from falling into the drainage layer. They'll have the substrate, and then they'll have the leaves, and then whatever decor. So and people ask me about this all the time, so I'm just going to cover it, even though I don't do it in my setups because I don't keep amphibians. But the most popular drainage layer is leca, which is an expanded clay substrate. They do sell these specifically for animals, but they're just clay balls. You can get them super cheap at any hardware store. If you really want to go bio, a hardware store will be your best friend because you can get anything you want there. You can even get plants. They also have really fun colored leca. So like these are colorful clay balls.
That's super cool.
If you really have like a pastel aesthetic you want to go for. You can use any potting soil as substrate as long as it doesn't have chemical food additives, especially if you have amphibians, because it could hurt them. They could absorb it through their skin. I have used ProMix in the past. I can't get it locally anymore. I don't know if they're not supplying our local stores or not, so we've had to switch to Sunshine. So this is what our substrate looks like that I typically use.
Okay.
This is perlite, which is somewhat controversial. It's a little arid rock, that volcanic rock that has been expanded. Just crushes super easily. It's really light. It's got a lot of holes in it, so it's great for absorbing or retaining moisture. For some reason, it's become somewhat controversial in isopods. I'm not sure why. I tried to talk to some people about it, and I think that they were confusing it with diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is made from fossilized skeletons of invertebrates and will literally shred invertebrates as they try to crawl through it. Perlite doesn't do that. I mean, it's not digestible. It has no nutritional value, but it does have a value in maintaining the moisture in soil. For barriers, there are two options. You can use screen. The thing about screen is if you cut it, there are sharp sides at the ends. And if your animal crawls underneath it, they can cut themselves. It's hard to show, but I've sliced myself in these plenty of times. But these are a very tough barrier and really awesome and really good at keeping things separate. If they're worried about the animal, like if you have a burrowing animal, like that would be great for frogs that don't really burrow that often. But if you have a burrower that you're worried about getting into the drainage layer, there's weed matting. Some weed matting has a plastic layer. Would not recommend that because it doesn't really allow it to breathe. So this is like a really nice barrier to prevent the dirt from falling into the leca. For leaf litter, people like magnolia leaves. These are live oak leaves. Like live oak and magnolia are probably the best. They're really thick in tannins. These are really popular in the aquarium hobby, so they're kind of expensive because of the tannins. You can source your own leaf litter. I recommend baking it in the oven at 200 Fahrenheit for at least 20 minutes to kill any potential parasitical carnivorous invertebrates that could hurt either your animal or your isopods. If it is not treated, our local problem that we have had is if it wasn't treated well enough, we have brought in carnivorous centipedes, stone centipedes, And those can be harmful to small reptiles, and they'll completely devour an entire isopod population. When I initially posted about the problem, people were astounded that they were breeding in my setups because I guess people were trying to breed them. And they are a mix of detrivore and predator. So they love the leaves and the isopods they could snack on.
Oh, no.
So you can absolutely, people collect and source their own materials all the time. That's how I got started. You just have to make sure it is treated correctly so you don't accidentally introduce a pest. For plants, really, it kind of varies based on the setup you want to do. A really good Band-Aid plant is pothos. Pothos grows at a really good rate. I mean, this plant, I think we took a cutting of it maybe a month ago. They pop out leaves all the time. They have this waxy covering on their leaves, which discourages isopods from eating them. These would be tough to have with a vegetarian, like a bearded dragon. But for geckos, I just like to hang around on them. They're great. They're really tough. I mean, you can just, nothing happens to them, you know? Even if it does, if a branch snaps off, it'll just grow a whole new shoot.
Those are pretty, I don't know, I've seen them at hardware stores. They're pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Are there any other plants? Oh, what's that?
This is an alocasia, which is very cute. These are a little bit more sensitive, but these also grow. You can see this one growing off the node here. This is something a little bit prettier. I don't have one here at the shop, unfortunately. I accidentally moved them all to my house and my setups, but Dracaena, it's kind of like a cross between a bromeliad and a tree, but they get really tall and they have like these little sprouty bits, and my chihuahua love to sit in them. So, but they get really big. So I'll have to switch out the Dracaena I have in my chihuahua tanks like every 2 years because they just get huge, and then they get what's called leggy. They just get a really long stem and their heads start rolling around. So we'll either have to chop off the top of the head of the plant, or we'll have to put in a new plant entirely.
Okay. Are there any plants that you don't recommend that are toxic or just don't really grow well?
Just the sensitive plants. I'm not as versed if plants are toxic because I don't keep vegetarian reptiles. That's something people with like bearded dragons and tortoises should really research really closely. If there isn't a lot on if it is toxic to reptiles, but there's a lot of articles if they're toxic to cats. And that's what I usually recommend people go with, and it hasn't steered me wrong yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's probably what I would recommend too. Because yeah, as a vet, yeah, I don't even know. I've had people ask me before, and I try to look, but unless there's like a scientific study, which there really mostly isn't out there.
There isn't a lot on reptiles. I mean, we are starting to get more because they're starting to get a lot of the attention with all the biological aspects with all the genes, but they don't get as much attention in the care aspect as they should.
Yeah, exactly. But, okay, so you got the plants. So mainly someone else said snake plants, philodendron work great too. Okay.
Yep. My brain always associates philodendron as pothos, and snake plants are good. Yep, but my brain always associates those as a sort of succulent. So you do have to be worried if you have a tendency to waterlog your soil. Like I wouldn't recommend keeping with dirt frogs, but they'd be really good with a lot of geckos. Okay,
cool. Octopus with no friends. Pothos are edible, yeah. Monkey toes, skinks love them. Okay.
I know that spider plants aren't. Well, I mean, they are edible, but I know mammals get sort of a high off of them. My dog ate some spider plant leaves while I was repotting them, and he was so chill the rest of the day.
Really?
Yeah, and he's a really anxious little dog.
That's so funny. I'm gonna have to get some of that. Mine are acting crazy. Just be like, here.
Yeah, right?
Knock yourself out.
Cats love them. I couldn't keep my spider plants in my house anymore because my cats kept gorging themselves on it. We even had them hanging from the ceiling, and then we caught one like springboarding off the counter, sailing across the room and snatching it from the air before he landed.
Oh my.
I was like, that's why I don't have any spiderlings.
I have like three, but two mostly crazy cats. So yeah.
Cats, I love them so much. They're demons. Oh, Monstera are also really great.
Oh, okay, cool.
Especially if you have like a bigger setup, like a bigger animal, you just want to Monstera deliciosa.
Oh, that's big.
They're a fully mature plant. But these guys, they're tough.
Yeah,
And they're pretty. They are so pretty.
it's pretty. That'd be good for like a chameleon enclosure that are pretty tall. You need some.
Yeah, they grow
Temperature.
right around the leaves.
Mhm.
And they also grow around tree stumps.
Hmm.
So you could put a wood part, like great wood, something like that, that's really large. I don't know, can you see it on the camera here? Sort
I
of.
can see them. Yeah.
I
can see
can't lift it up because it's so heavy, but like we tied it to this tree stump with twine, and then you can encourage it to grow around it.
Cool.
That way the plant is more supported and the chameleon also gets like their plants.
Cool. That's awesome.
So, but I can do that demonstration we talked about
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
just for a visual. So I don't do the drainage layer just because I don't need it with my geckos. I say with a lot of things with like non-amphibians, if it's so wet you need a drainage layer, it's probably gonna make the animals sick. So it's best to adjust your husbandry. Like with crested geckos, it needs to be a whole cryo period. So this is how I set up all my new cows. This probably won't work as well for frogs because frogs actually do like and enjoy stagnant water. They do really well in it, especially because they need standing pools to lay their eggs and raise their tadpoles. But for geckos, this has worked so well with me. I used to do the whole drainage layer, the weed barrier with my geckos, and I constantly had females. No matter what I did, how wide I cut the drainage layer with the weed matting, I folded around everything. The females would, like over half of them, would burrow underneath the drainage with the eggs.
Oh wow! And then lay the eggs underneath the.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I know that there's some people who straight up won't even offer their females bio because it's such a pain in the butt, or they'll put a lay box in that same area. I really enjoy letting them have a burrowing area with all this substrate because you see a lot of natural behaviors. Like you'll just see them making these little burrows and hanging out. Even the males do it. It makes them, they're really happy when they have dirt to just sit in, you know? So about that much is what I do. It's about an inch of substrate.
Okay.
This substrate is really nice because if God forbid you have some sort of a life emergency and you can't go and do maintenance on your animal, if they get too dry, because that'll hurt them more before starvation, they can burrow into the substrate and get that moisture they need and still be 100% okay.
Okay. Makes sense.
And then leaves.
Okay. And that's just for, like you said, the isopods that kind of hide in and.
It's good for the entire setup.
Okay.
The leaves is kind of like a layer of insulation with the moisture. It keeps it that happy medium of keeping in the moisture without keeping in too much. So when we moisturize it, we just mist the top. And it keeps in all the moisture that needs to be there. It's really good for the animals too, because especially with young geckos, it offers them a hiding space. But if you're going to add a cleanup crew, you absolutely need leaves or they will not thrive.
And that's because eat the leaves? Sorry. Is that because they eat the leaves or the reptile?
They do.
Them?
Okay. The leaves are their primary diet. The reptile really enjoys leaves, so even if you don't have cleaners, it's nice to have leaves. But the isopods very much need leaves. Then I got a bunch of cork here. If you have the millipedes in a bio setup, you cannot use cork. You cannot use cork or coco coir. I know a lot of people like to set up bio with coco coir, which I don't recommend, but you absolutely cannot use it with millipedes because it will cause impaction and they will pass.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So don't use this if you have millipedes.
Yeah.
This is being set up for like an arboreal animal. Let's see if this will even fit, and it will not. The nice thing about cork is you don't even really need a saw.
Just break
You
it.
can just break it with your hands. And cork is a renewable resource. I think they steam treat the trees and they just peel the bark off. And they can harvest bark from the same trees once or twice a year.
Oh, never knew that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Pretty reasonable.
You can get both cork rounds and cork flats. If you're using cork rounds, you want to make sure you use rounds that the animal can comfortably crawl through. If it's a younger animal, you're going to want to check your rounds once or twice a year as the animal grows to make sure they don't get trapped. Because they're fun. Most reptiles are not too smart. And they will get trapped. Yeah, unfortunately. It's best to make the setup crowded, but not too crowded, because you do want to see your animals sometimes. After this step, you can add plants. It is not a necessity, but it does make it look pretty.
Mm-hmm.
When adding plants, I do recommend sticking to what you would use as a house plant, because they do really well in low light conditions. Mm-hmm. So you could just put like an LED bulb on top of this and the plant will still grow, you know?
Okay.
When setting up bio, especially in a glass tank, the tanks need to be kept away from direct sunlight and windows, because the glass amplifies the heat and you can bake your animal. So out of direct sunlight in a room that gets regular light rhythms is the best case scenario for bio. If you have plants, I would recommend a LED light. Otherwise, it's not necessary as long as it's in a room that gets some amount of light.
Okay.
The lighting may need to be adjusted, especially if you have plants, but that's really dependent on the species you use. Putting the plants in is really dealer's choice at this point. If you get them directly from a garden center, a home improvement store, it is best to put your plants in quarantine. These places will usually put them directly in soil. They'll be treating them with some sort of, plant food.
Okay.
They might have pests. So I do recommend, if you get them from somebody you're not entirely sure about, putting the plant in quarantine so you're not introducing spider mites, some other pest into your setup. In this case, and this is something I've grown here, so I know it's safe, but like you would want to wash off and remove all the soil just in case there might be something in it, because that's where they love to be. When you put your plants in a setup, you want to plan for it to grow. So while this looks kind of naked, these guys, this one especially, will just keep growing up and twining around this. This one will grow and it'll get really big, but it's got space to spread. If I were to keep this here, I would probably have to trim this leaf because I can see it growing up and out of here. But I don't want to put it too much further back because it'll be obscured. But the nice thing about bio is nobody's going to tell you what you can or can't do. You can always change it later.
Right.
And your lizard doesn't know what's going on. It doesn't have a home decor diploma or whatever. It's just going to be like, this is great. It's wet, just how I like it. It's got bugs. I've got a lady who feeds me whenever I need to eat. What more could you want? Oh, here's another plant I forgot to mention. This is a Transcendia.
Oh, it's pretty.
Some people, okay, the PC name for it is Wandering Dude. But we have a couple of different variations. People get intimidated by them because of their color. They think they're a very exotic plant. I could drop this on the floor, find it 2 months later, throw it in some moss, and it would perk up immediately. I can cut this in 5 different spots, and it'll sprout from every single spot.
Wow.
These are great. They are so tolerant of abuse, and they do so well.
And they're pretty. I mean, I like that purple.
They are, and you'll have like striped ones sometimes, and they're just a lot of fun. But you can twine these up. They'll just keep throwing out branches. These are a great starter plant right up there with the pothos and philodendron. Then you get your isopods. So these are the powders I keep mentioning. So popular. And these guys have
powder blue. Are those the powder blues or just powders in general?
They are okay. So the thing about powder blue is the common name for the species. Okay. This is technically considered a powder mix because it has about 5 different colors in it. They're all the same species. They're just different colors. So they're different mutations.
Ah, I see.
They all perform the same purpose. And you don't have to do anything special with them. You can just dump them in.
Dump them in. Oh, somebody had a question. What was the purple plant again?
Transcendia.
Transcendia. Okay. People call them wandering.
And that is a genus.
Okay.
So there's a couple different plants that are called Transcendias. We have a whole shelf. That one in particular was Transcendia Setcransa. I believe this thing is in the Transcendia family. It was getting kind of leggy, so I cut it off. Oh, I cut the top of this off the mother plant a week ago, and it's already got roots this long. They root and grow so fast. It's amazing. This is another species of Transcendia. It has little stripy leaves. You'll see these a lot in like the artificial plant section of people like mimicking them, and they are so easy to keep. Like if I were to pop this in moss, I literally just pulled it off the plant back there. It will probably grow roots here. It's already got a root like growing right there. If you can kind of see that. They're so easy to work with.
That's cool. I love the purple on the bottom side.
Yeah, and it's so pretty. It's so fun to have in gecko setups.
Yeah, I love I like the colored plants, so.
I forgot the Springtails. I gotta grab those. I'm here.
All right, so thanks for the questions, guys. Keep them coming. I want you guys to get as much out of this as possible.
I love this question too, because if you have it as a question, someone else does too. So these are Springtail cups. We do have them on the website. They're in a lot of PetSmarts. We supply 750 PetSmarts nationwide. We culture them on clay. So these can be kept room temperature out of sunlight, and these will encourage the Springtails to grow and breed for up to 2 years.
Oh, wow.
You can see those.
Those are Springtails in the clay there?
Yep.
Okay.
You will find these outside, but this is a much easier way to culture and keep them rather than digging through grime trying to get them outside. And these are temperate, so they can be used in a variety of setups. They honestly, at this point, they introduce themselves to both my Isopod tubs and my gecko tubs. But there are instructions on the side of how to culture them and introduce them. The easiest way to do it is just flip the cup upside down, tap them until they fall out. You can see there's much less Springtails in here now because they're in there. There are still Springtails in here because they burrow into the clay. A lot of people, they think they have to scoop everything into their tank. You don't. Keep it like this. They'll keep growing and culturing in these. And you can keep adding them in here to increase the population.
Okay. So you can already buy that kind of clay cup with them, and they just kind of repopulate in the clay cup then.
Absolutely.
Over time.
Yep.
Okay. Somebody else there. Let's see. I think some other people answered, but bromeliads, yes or no?
It depends on the setup. So bromeliads are very, very popular with frog setups. If you've got a fat, rickless gecko, they will destroy your bromeliad. It's more so the bromeliads, they aren't bad for the animal, but the animal could be bad for the bromeliad. I
see. Just from the weight standpoint and just
yes.
Yeah, because they're kind of colorful, right?
Yes, they're very pretty. They're very gorgeous plants. They would be great for like morning geckos, house geckos, Eurydactylotes. You're kind of riding a fine line with crested geckos. I would absolutely not putting them in with lychees or a larger gecko because they'll just, I can just imagine them trying to sit on the flower and the whole thing just snapping in half. And those don't reroot once you break them, unfortunately.
Okay. That's a good question. That's one of my favorites. And then somebody Hooked on gecko. Oh, they get very big. He asked Cheetos looking one. Do you know what he's referring to there? I don't know.
I think they mean the Cheeto Springtails.
Oh, okay.
They're hilarious. Okay, so like the Springtail people hate that people call them this, but we have them labeled as Cheeto dust.
Oh, that's funny.
This is a Springtail native to Germany. These are a tempered Springtail. They do not tolerate being in warm temperatures very well. We almost lost our entire culture during a heat wave last year.
Oh, wow.
So they do need to be kept cooler. And we just had another heat wave and our cultures will be rough again. Better than last year, though.
And then your Isopod culture, you had Springtails with that one. So is it just species dependent on which ones you can have together?
Mostly the white Springtails will outcompete most other Springtails. While we keep other Springtail species, you see them right there.
Okay, yeah.
Chubby little Cheeto.
Yeah, I could. Very tiny little red guys.
They're so cool. They're not good cleaners.
Okay, so that's more for like.
They're not good cleaners at all. But they're so cute. They're really popular with people that really like bugs. People really like to put them in terrariums because it is fun to just see a horde of Cheetos just partying in a corner. But they are not great cleaners. They don't breed very fast.
Okay. Then somebody else asked, what plants would you recommend for larger snakes?
So, ironic as it sounds, I would recommend a snake plant. Otherwise, it depends on the environment. So, like, hognose are really a semi-arid animal. You're going to probably want, like, a variety of succulents in with them, but not sensitive succulents. So, something like a gasteria or a haworthia. But with those semi-arid animals, a lot of times they'll keep them in the pots themselves because it can be difficult to maintain how the plants need to be with the soil, because then you get the look of bio, but your plant isn't destroyed. And a lot of like the remedy snakes will totally uproot the plant, which can be really difficult. The Hoya family, so it's like a semi-succulent and can do really well. It's really dependent on how destructive your animal is. You've got to work with the animal in that case. These are gasteria. I water them once a week. And these would be a cute visual for like a semi-arid larger snake.
Okay.
But, you know, thinking about it, if my blood python crawled over one of these, she would snap its root.
Yeah, those get big. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a really, really big snake, you're really limited to the COCOs just because they can withstand a lot of abuse. If a snake crawled over a COCOs a couple times a day, as long as she's not sleeping on it for 2 days straight, the COCOs will pop back. Most other plants, like another really popular one is the sprayer plants. If you were to bend this, snap it, this won't recover. It'll throw out new shoots, but the leaves themselves won't recover. A pothos and philodendron would recover from something like that.
And what's that one again?
This is a sprayer plant. This is like a high humidity plant. It's really cute. I forget which variety of plant this is exactly, but this is another one that's like really visually cute.
Yeah.
So this is one.
It's pretty.
I wouldn't do this with lychees. I do it with like up to a chihuahua-sized animal. So that's like a 2 foot in length, 70 to 80 gram animal. It could withstand one of these because these leaves are tough. They're just not 20 pound, 6 foot snake tough. You know what I mean?
Cool. I think any more questions. So you add the Springtails and Isopod. You can just add them kind of at the same time. Is there like a period that you should wait before putting your animal in, like to let them grow? And
I've been doing this for so long, I will just throw the animals in.
Okay.
I'm like, good luck, plants. Let's see if you're still here in a month. But when you're first setting up a bio, I don't recommend putting in plants you're in love with. Put in plants that you are ready to put through it and see if they can make it.
Okay.
A lot of people do what they call a cycling period, where they're letting their cleanup crew, their bacteria to establish. Because even with bagged potting soil, which has gone through a treatment process, because people that use potting soil, they're using it for their own personal plants. And people don't want to, the people who produce the potting soil, they don't want to introduce pests to those plants. So it is pest-free, but you will see mold growth. So most common mold growth will be white mold and yellow mold. The white mold is typically mycorrhizae, and mycorrhizae is a beneficial fungus that it's like a symbiotic relationship with the plant, and it's really good for the cleaners too. And they'll eat that beneficial. That's one of the few fungus they'll eat. It's really good for stuff like millipedes as well, and it encourages the growth of plants, but it scares the hell out of people, especially because initially when there's nothing to keep it in check, it just blooms.
Right.
And then the yellow fungus it's like yellow houseplant fungus is like the common name for it, and you'll see tiny little mushrooms. In the past, that was completely harmless. There was a strain going around 2 years ago that was harmful to frogs. So people will set up a bio a month or two before introducing the frogs, especially.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, to see if there's a bloom, because the fungus can be very harmful to amphibians. Otherwise, it's just gross if you're using like something that isn't amphibious. I've never had issues chucking a gecko into a freshly set up bio. But a lot of parts about the bio is the aesthetic, and lots of fungus and mold is not visually pleasing to people. So they like to let it cycle to make sure it's all good to go first, which is completely understandable.
I had a client recently, like a vet client. They had some frogs. They had a bioactive, and they were seeing other insects in there. I think they just had springtails, but they were seeing, and they couldn't send a picture, so I don't know what it was, but some type of like worm or something like that. Is that probably brought in on the plants, you think?
Those are nematodes. Yeah,
nematode. Okay, that's what he said they were. How do people, are they harmful, or how do people get
nematodes? It is, I don't think it's even a genus. I think it's an entire order of invertebrates. Some of them are parasitic. The majority are beneficial. All of them are super gross looking.
Yeah, he was freaked out. I was like,
the parasitic nematodes have a certain life cycle where the animal that was infected with the nematode would have had to have come in contact with the soil. The treatment that potting soil goes through, it is so extremely unlikely that you introduce nematodes if you use potting soil or even any reptile safe soil. What happens more often is they come in on leaf litter. If that isn't treated, if you're very worried about it, always treat the leaf litter. But sometimes nematodes just show up. Like people will be like, where do these bugs come from? Another one people get is mites. Absolutely terrified of mites. Typically what people see are the grain mites or the orbital mites, which can just come from outside. Say, oh, but I'm inside. How'd they come in from outside? They can get in through the tiniest spaces. You know, I mean, unless you live in a bubble and your house is sealed all the time, you're going to have teeny tiny invertebrates you can't see. And then they find this nice, warm, wet spot and they just grow. Yeah. And the really nice part about the isopods in the springtails and letting it cycle for a month or two is that when the springtails get to a healthy population, they outcompete those other microorganisms. And like initially when I set up an isopod tub or a bio, we'll see a bloom, and I call it a bloom in soil mites, because they are seizing that basically space of opportunity for a food source. But then as the springtails get their foot in, because they're much more successful at breeding and eating than the mites are, the mites lose their opportunity and food source and either leave or die off as the springtails take over.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think I have beneficial nematodes in with another type of springtail. LC. They have the beneficial nematodes have been like gaining a lot of traction because they eat fungus gnat eggs. So they prevent fungus gnats from establishing themselves in your collections. But I might not have been keeping this button up for them. Let's see if I can find some. I mean, you'll see them occasionally, but they're like a translucent, just gross looking little roundworm. And the little monkey part of your brain is screaming about how it's going to hurt you. This is bad. Which is absolutely normal. Yeah.
He was like, is it good for my frogs or me? And I was like, probably not. I mean, it's hard because I don't even know what type of nematode
I can't even see them in here anymore because they died out with the Springtails. But the majority are harmless. If you don't like it and you forgot, God forbid, to see some of these things, you want to get rid of them, what you can do is you can quarantine the enclosure, just pour Springtails on it, let the soil dry out a little bit. If you want to be absolutely sure they're gone, you have to do a total substrate change.
That's what I kind of recommended to him. You do it. So
yeah. I mean, I totally understand people not liking it, but unfortunately, the only way to get rid of it completely is to do a total substrate change.
Yeah.
When mites are found in new bio setups, I'm like, I'm really sorry. You might just be in an area that they're really prevalent. And if you keep getting it, you'll keep getting rid of whatever's out competing them. So the best thing you can do is tough it out and just kind of wait for them to die off. Because they almost always bloom and then die off in 30 to 60 days. Okay. And if you keep gutting it, you keep bringing them food sources to eat off of.
Yeah. So they just get out-competed by this. But the Springtails and the Isopods, they don't obviously out-compete.
No. Well, they're different levels of cleaner. Okay. So the isopods, they'll clean the really big waste items. They'll obviously be eating the leaves. That's their main diet. But they'll clean all the animal waste, the sheds. If you feed your gecko like the blended diet, like the complete gecko diet from Pangea, you'll find them all over the food bowls, cleaning up whatever your gecko didn't eat, stuff like that. The Springtails eat kind of the layer you don't see. As it's being broken down, the really microscopic layer that the isopods wouldn't even see. And that's what the Springtails are beneficial for. And then as you grow and culture your biome, there's also another layer of bacteria that you can't even see that's further cleaning it. And if you have a really healthy layer of bacteria, it prevents any sort of smells. I have 600 lizards in my house and it smells like a greenhouse. It doesn't smell like animals at all.
Okay. And the bacteria, you kind of talked about it before. I've heard it is the same as BioShot. Is that what that is? Or is it?
So they developed BioShot for aquariums.
Okay.
I think the BioDude might have some bacteria.
I heard it was from him.
Yeah, yes, that's what that is. That is a beneficial bacteria that you will specifically find in soil.
Okay. And so you put that to kind of feed both your...
It kind of jump starts it. Okay. So the bacteria can survive unless you're totally sterilizing everything, including the dirt. If you get potting soil, you're going to have some bacteria in there. It's just a matter of treating your bioactive correctly to grow the good bacteria to establish itself in the biome. Which is also why I don't recommend people sterilize everything, which would come into the baking and the boiling aspect. Because if you're truly trying to go bio, you do need some level of beneficial bacteria to get the full biome going.
Right. It makes sense. I've seen them sell isopod food too. Is that sort of, what is that? Just
I actually make my own isopod food.
Oh, you make your own isopod food.
Oh, me too.
Talk a little bit about that.
So this is just kind of if it's really for people who are very serious about cultivating isopods. Like here it is here. You can find it on our website. It's green because everything I do is green. But we have 42 ingredients in it, and it's really great just to encourage the isopods to breed really rapidly, to produce very large, healthy broods. It isn't necessary for isopods in bio, but adding the food with all those different ingredients, because we have tons of different fruits and vegetables, nutrients, stuff like that, proteins, that it encourages a really healthy, wide diet for them to reproduce even more quickly.
Okay. So definitely more on the breeder side, but it wouldn't hurt, I guess, if you have a bioactive.
I don't use it in my large cultures, which are the 25 liters, but I like using it in these little ones here to get the population, get kind of like their foot in the door and get them growing faster, since we don't have many usually in these starter cultures.
Okay. And then for the bigger cultures, do you put like just vegetable waste in there, or how do you?
Yeah.
That's probably scraps from dinner, maybe.
I go to the grocery store and I buy $100 in vegetables every month.
Oh, wow.
My employees hate that week. I'm like, hey, we got more vegetables at the shop. And they're like, no.
How many employees do you have?
What's that?
How many employees do you have?
8.
8. Oh, wow. Okay.
So we don't use broccoli, because when broccoli decays, it smells like death farts. So I don't recommend feeding broccoli or cabbages, because as it decays, it smells terrible. Most leafy greens smell really bad as they decay, even though they're really nutritional. But I'll get them apples, bananas. I do avoid most other fruits because they mold more quickly, and because of the sugar content, you get like this really weird blue purple mold that just looks startling. We cut up a bunch of squashes, lots of root vegetables, carrots and potatoes. Sometimes if they have a sale on something weird, I'll just grab a bunch of it. Like one month they had an overstock of asparagus. And the asparagus actually doesn't smell too bad as it decays. So we feed them a bunch of asparagus. They love mushrooms. But we just chop all that up. We throw a handful in these master cultures. I don't like to give it to the little ones because they don't eat them as well, but the master cultures eat the fresh vegetables great. And we mix them all up, and that way they get a variety at least once a week. And then we also give them a big handful of fish flakes. You can use really any market fish flakes. We switch between the cichlid, the goldfish, the other kinds, depending on what is the cheapest. Because the isopods don't care. The whole reason we give it to them is just to get that protein boost. And then I also do recommend giving them a calcium source to have a better reproduction rate, since the base of their exoskeleton is calcium.
Right.
When I first started, what was really popular is cuttlefish. But cuttlefish in most recent years have become really overfished. So it was very difficult to get a hold of cuttlefish for a while. So what we switched over to doing is honestly eggshells. And we befriended a restaurant that now drops off a 30-gallon bag of eggshells every week.
Oh, wow.
And people thought for a long time they would message me. They thought they had to sterilize eggshells. And I'm like, no, do not. Well, don't we have to wash them? I'm like, no, you do not, because the slime on the eggshells is from the egg itself, and it's filled with protein. So we just lay them out flat. We let them dry, because since it is a protein slime, if you don't dry it out completely, if it stays moist, it begins to decay, and then it kind of smells basically like death because of the protein decay. So what I recommend is just laying them out flat until they dry completely. Then we crush them up, and we put them in these 3-gallon buckets. We use our old fish flake buckets. So like we have these buckets labeled eggshells all over the shop. I think this one's actually empty. Yeah, it's pretty much empty because we just got our drop up of eggshells the other day. But this is from a 30-gallon bag of eggshells this restaurant person dropped off for me.
Oh, wow, look at that.
And as long as you make sure it's dry all the way.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these are kind of stuck together. You can kind of see like a shine from that protein that was left over from the egg goo. And they just love it. It's so funny because isopods will take food sources and drag them into their burrows for themselves and their offspring. So when you're going through, especially if we're doing substrate changes, we do substrate changes about every 6 months with isopods, you'll just find these little stashes of eggshells in random parts of the setup where the isopods put them for use later.
It's really cool. It's helpful for, I mean, surprisingly, like mammals and like rodents too, because I know some of my friends eat ASFs, like boiled eggs, and they eat the whole shell for that. So it's really good for that that too, but yeah, makes sense on their exoskeleton. I think we have another, let's see. Regan Renee, hello. Hey, I bought my wife red tigers for Christmas from Smug. They were awesome.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, cool shout out there. And then Medusa Complex, this might be a dumb question. There are no dumb questions, but can you put different kinds of isopods in the same bioactive pollution? That's a really good question, I think, actually.
Yes, you can. You do have to be somewhat careful about it because some isopods are more aggressive than others. There's a lot in the Porcellio genus, which is the dairy cows. The Porcellios are very aggressive compared to other genre of isopods, and they will hunt and kill other species. Anything in the Armadillidium, which is the roly-polies and the roll-up tight, they will get along great. The Porcellionites purinosis, they are fantastic, lovely little roommates. They will get along with anybody, and they breed so fast, even if the dairy cows eat them, they'll still survive.
Oh.
If you want to mix multiple species, what I do recommend is with these cork bark, a good way to like just monitor the population, and you can already see it here. They crawl on the cork bark and just kind of hang out. You can see this little guy here.
Already crawling.
And if you lay it flat, like this was the part that was in the dirt, they'll stay on there because that's where they hang out. Like these are the ones I threw in earlier, and they're already hanging out in the cork. So if you lay it flat in your setup, you can lift it up when you do your checks and see how the isopod population is doing. And then if there's a lot on there, this is the way you can use to harvest them out of the tank without redoing the entire tank. So you can wet it down good, grab your cork bark, just kind of, and I'm going to do this for example, toss it like that into an empty bin. That's how we do most of our harvesting. And then you have all those isopods that were in there.
Okay.
That way they don't overpopulate the setup. Yeah. And you can see if there's like a good distribution of species if they're out competing each other.
Okay. That makes sense.
That's probably a more complicated answer than it had to be, but
no, it's fantastic. No, because I had a question earlier on how it's probably just species dependent too, but like how often do you replenish population? Just when you do your checks, you see that you're low and you add more in, or how's that work?
Yeah, it depends on your setup because I mean, even within a species, every animal is different. I have geckos that hunt out all their isopods and eat them all. I have geckos, every time I open their tub, they're wearing an isopod as a hat because they just don't care. I've had geckos where I have to do substrate changes every 6 months because they don't eat any of their isopods, and they end up with Laevis or Dilatatus that burrow in the setup, and they just eat. They will eat potting soil, the Laevis and Dilatatus, because it's meant to be broken down and nourish plants. And so they eat it and turn it into this like sandy hydrophobic substrate. And I have to remove a half to 2/3 of it and put a new substrate because it's too sandy and her eggs dry out. So, I mean, I do recommend just kind of like doing a deeper look at least every 6 months to see how the biome is looking. And if it seems off, if the dirt seems off, I tell people that if you have like some sort of a plant intuition, like the soil seems gross, as weird as that sounds to say, you might want to change out some substrate or remove some of the isopods.
Okay. Pretty cool. One other question I had is like, we talked about the pros, like eating the waste, but is there cons to bioactive setup? Like even somebody has a species where it could be beneficial. Is there maybe a reason why they shouldn't do it? I feel like no, but.
A big con, I know a lot of people is very stressed about the whole process of setting it up because it can be really stressful that it has all these different layers that make it more complex than what might be already complex of someone being new to keeping a reptile. The bugs are going to escape. That's just something you got to accept. The isopods are going to escape. You're going to have hard water, even if you use RO water. It's going to dry on the side. It's going to have calcium deposits. It's going to texture the glass. The isopods are going to crawl out. And you're going to find them dried up in corners. And that deters a lot of people. With the bio is a little bit of a learning curve because when I first started doing bio, I was still spraying every day like I used to. And they all got waterlogged. And when a setup gets waterlogged, you get the bad bacteria buildup because of the bacteria that grows in water, and it stinks really bad. And so then you got to go in and you got to scoop up all the soggy, stinky dirt and then replace it. That's a learning thing that almost every biokeeper I have talked to has had to go through.
I see.
But in my opinion, the benefits is very much outweigh the negatives. I've had a lot of people tell me that they're terrified of bugs, and isopods have kind of helped them get over that fear, or they found isopods endearing. And my gecko setups, like I have my chihuahua set up in things exactly like this. The only maintenance I do is I spend maybe 2 to 5 minutes per tank scraping off any waste they might have on the sides. I don't even have to do that, just because I like it. And it prevents the typical lizard smell you'd have from keeping a reptile. You see a lot more natural behaviors from the animals that you wouldn't before. You see a lot more burrowing behavior. In my personal opinion, they are more active than they would be being kept in like a sterile type setup. Speaking of though, if the animal is injured, if there's an open wound, I do recommend keeping them in strictly sterile and not bio, because although it is beneficial bacteria, it is still bacteria. And if it gets in an open wound that's healing, it can cause problems.
Right. Interesting.
So that would be the one instance I'm like, you absolutely cannot do bio. Like my snake had it was basically a pressure sore. She had her water bowl right by her setup, and I would refill it every day, but I wouldn't pull her out every day because, I mean, she's not a puppy. She doesn't like being handled. She tolerates it. So I took her out. She hadn't eaten in like a while. I'd been leaving her alone because she laid eggs. When I took her out, she had some scale rat at the base of her tail because she kept dumping her water bowl into her hide. And so she was sitting in this soggy, disgusting spot of moist dirt. So she had to be on a sterile setup with just paper towels for 2 months while we got that wound to heal.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and can make it worse. So yeah, okay, it's good to keep in mind too. Speaking of behavior, so what I do with every podcast, like at the end, I ask somebody to ask the next person something. So the guest I had on last week want me to ask the next guest, how do you feel about the idea of breeding for behavior? This is probably more on the gecko side of things. Your thoughts on breeding for stress, adaptability, that type of thing?
I think that is an excellent idea. That is also why when I list animals, if I have one that has a particularly bad, forget the word, temperament, I will always notate it. If there is an animal, even if it's stunning, if they just have a nasty attitude, even after, because sometimes you breed an animal and they get those initial rush of hormones out, or if they get worse, I'm like, we have to sell this. Like, I don't want to keep working with them. And with dogs and cats, they're considered domesticated because they have been bred for docile behavior. Reptiles have not been in domestic households that long, so they're not considered domesticated. They're considered captive. If we could someday get to that level of domesticated reptiles, it would be amazing.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Definitely is going to take a long time, but yes. I think it's interesting. It would be beneficial, especially on the pet level too, just because a lot of people do build bonds with those animals and kind of almost put that above than say like a certain morph or something like that. Breeders, I think we're looking more for the morphs. For me as a ball python or a leopard gecko breeder, I could care less about behavior, but the morph or that specific gene is more important to me than the behavior part of it. But so yeah, that's part of it. So okay, pretty cool. I'm trying to see if there's any questions. We're coming up on an hour and a half, so we're kind of wrap it up here in the next 15 minutes or so. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. This has been a fantastic episode. I've learned so much. I do want to get some isopods now. I want to get those dairy. I think I want to get the dairy cows.
The dairy cows are so cute.
I do.
They're so cute.
I do shows and stuff. I don't know how I'd feel about shipping, but I do shows, and I feel like people, at least near me, are walking around with more isopods than like animals.
Oh yeah.
Stuff like that. So I feel like it's a good market out there for it.
Well, and they're a really good way to introduce people to. I'm grabbing my dairy cows now. To invertebrates just because they're so cute, you know. Shoot, I can dairy cows next door. We have so many dairy cows. They have a specific section of the shop to themselves.
Oh yeah. They're the ones I just remember. So okay, couple we have questions. Awesome. Thank you so much, Medusa Complex. We will bring those up in a second.
We almost always sell out of dairy cows.
I think I might try that then. Just put on my table and just see how it goes.
I had one of my employees go without me to an expo this weekend, and she said one of the only things they sold out of because they were without me were the dairy cows. People just love them, but they are so cute.
You just sell them like in a plastic tub of kind of already like that, just maybe on a smaller scale.
Sort of. We used to do just the like little moss cups, but we've done like square cups because they're just more aesthetic.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they're super cute. They get pretty decent sized.
Yeah.
I'll feed them off to my Chihuahua. My Chihuahua will take them. I love my Chihuahua. They'll take them off the tongs for me.
Interesting. I wonder if my leopard geckos would. I don't know.
They might, yeah.
I know they do. They eat dubia, but
if you tongue feed them dubia, they will eat the isopods off the tongs for you as well. Oh, I actually have some of the show cups here. I guess they didn't end up using all the shows.
oh, Alex Cheerleaders, cool. So I have leopard geckos, so that is something I may look into then.
This one's a little bit dry, but we have a little bit of dirt, some moss and leaves, and we just wet it down real good. And we put the isopods in there and label it. We don't seal it or anything because we encourage people to open it up and see the animals they are buying.
Cool.
So, but they look really nice in the tables too.
Where do you get those? Where do you get them at? Those little plastic.
This kind, I don't remember where I got this one from specifically, but I don't really recommend this style because it's got teeny tiny little holes there. But Redline Shipping is where I order the majority of mine from. And they have these just perfect little square cups that have the top ventilation that are just pinholes. And unfortunately, so here's the lid of the Redline ones. It's basically the same, but the holes on the side are pinholes, so the isopods don't escape. With those little square ones, you can only use like with large species, or if they brood inside the cups, all of the offspring escape, and we have isopod. We learned the hard way, but we learned. It doesn't look like I have any more of those here at the shop. I need to put in another order.
I have a few questions. The Medusa Complex. With Springtails, does the soil have to stay relatively damp?
It has to stay damp for you to see them. Even if it dries out completely, if you water it, usually you see a resurgence in them. Not always. There is a pretty large chance you'll lose them if it dries completely. But if you want to have active, constantly breeding springtails, it does need to stay damp because they breed in stagnant puddles of water. A lot of times people will see a ton of springtails just having a party in a water dish. Sorry to say that is a springtail orgy. It is all of them hanging out and having a good time and making more springtails. So, got a good biome going, but it's kind of gross.
Yeah. That's a good analogy. Okay. And Medusa Complex. So she's thinking about her hognoses arid environment when she's asking this, but she's wondering if it's necessary to have both springtails and isopods.
When I initially started, I did not intentionally introduce springtails. Springtails introduced themselves. either by the substrate I brought in or just, I mean, you get flies in your house all day. I mean, who's to say a springtail won't bounce its way somehow eventually over months and months? You will have a lot healthier biome if you introduce the springtails immediately. You'll have a lot less incidence of mold, but you can get by without them, especially in semi-arid.
Okay. Cool. Hopefully that helps out there. I think. See, rubber duckies. I've heard of those too. They're like, I'm assuming they're bright yellow ones, right? I think I've seen those.
Yellow with black
Orange?
saddles. Yeah.
Oh, black saddle. Okay. Really seen
There's
them.
also blonde duckies, which are all yellow, and then pink duckies, which have a reduced saddle. They're super cute. They're horrible breeders and cleaners. Don't get them if you want a cleaner, but they are super duper cute. Let's see. Looks like I got blonde duckies over here. Did you want to see rubber duckies?
Sure, yeah. If you have them.
I'm never sure which one we have in the little tubs because I always just throw them at my employees. And I'm like, here, put this in something bigger. Good luck. Of course, we're going to do that. To successfully breed rubber duckies, they need to be kept 80 Fahrenheit or higher. It's not as good as breeding them because I don't like being that warm. And I don't have them on a heat mat. And they do need some amount of substrate depth because they like to burrow.
Oh, yeah, I see it. It's like yellow, yeah, with the black.
But they are so cute. This one's almost full grown, but it's got that like little dark marking saddleback. And then it's got the cute little duckbill face there.
Oh, yeah. I do see the small little guy.
This is what really helped the Isopod hobby take off. They were found and collected in Thailand about 6 years ago, and the internet lost their minds.
Really?
And people still, they come to my booth all the time and ask for them. Every expo we're at, do you have rubber duckies? Do you have rubber duckies? I'm like, not going.
Okay. I might look into those too. Cool. And with them like getting out, can they, because I know with dubia, like if they get out of your house, they can't live and they just like die.
They will not infest your house.
Okay.
They will just dry up in a corner. Isopods, they need a constant source of moisture and a constant like organic based substance to eat. So unless you like literally have a wet patch of dirt somewhere in your house, if you have an ecosystem in your house that can support isopods are not your biggest problem.
Yeah.
Like you probably need someone to look at just the entire skeleton of your house if that's happening.
Right. Okay, makes sense. I see how it would worry some people, but like I had dubia before and like, yes, I hated it when they got out, but I knew they weren't gonna like invest and I just would find one randomly dead. Not the best, but it's
gross, but they're not gonna hurt anybody.
Right. Yeah, I think I had like somebody coming over, taking over my pets or something, and they didn't close. I had them feed the bearded dragon, but they didn't close the top on the thing.
Yeah.
So I came home and I was like, I'm gonna find some in my house.
Yeah.
Probably, so
really gross, but they're not like the American cockroaches that will literally survive on drywall in like a dripping sink. They
don't carry disease, probably.
It's just an unpleasant surprise. No, they don't carry diseases. Isopods, their waste is literally dirt. As far as I know, there isn't any sort of disease that is zoonotic, which means it can transfer between species, carried by isopods. With roaches, I know it's if their waste, which is called frass, insect frass, specifically with the invasive roaches, is they'll get the waste will build up and grow mold, and that's what causes a lot of asthma reactions and a lot of health problems with people. But that's only if they're like infesting and living in your walls, you know. With an animal that's going to die, I mean, in the case of roaches, within a couple of weeks, isopods within a couple of hours if they don't find somewhere wet to hang out. There's one time I found a peach nasodum living in my bathroom. And I'm pretty sure it'd been there for a while because it was like hugging the moisture of the toilet. And I'm like, oh no, buddy.
Oh no, he's like, oh, I'm trying to survive here. Help me out.
Only place I've ever found a living isopod, and I think what happened is I was probably feeding isopods, and while moving things, it probably got stuck onto my shirt, and I went to the bathroom after, and it fell off and survived until I found it.
Poor little guy. Trying to see, no more questions in the chat that I see. So probably start wrapping up. Was there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we nailed everything.
I think that's what I just kind of wanted to get a mindset of how people, like, we could do this in our own homes, how it could benefit our own animals. It seems
absolutely doable. Yeah.
Relative.
I mean, I started doing this because I was overwhelmed with twins and I wanted to make life easier for myself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if a sleep-deprived mom of newborn twins can do it, you can too.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just learning about the species of it that seems a little bit like overwhelming. But if there's like,
it is because there's so many. There's so many now.
I think I would just pick the ones I like and maybe just focus on those. Oh, Tiffany has one. Another question. For those who may not know, what are good isopods for tarantulas?
No isopods.
No.
If you're dead set on an isopod, a dwarf species would be really good. So Venzio parvis is what's really fun. Only because they are so good at pretending to be rocks. I'll go grab some. Otherwise, what I typically recommend is Springtails, just because the tarantulas are so sensitive that anything like that, like I actually had a tarantula here that was molting, I didn't realize it, and then it decided it didn't want to continue with life. So if they're molting and an isopod comes and prods them with their tiny little legs, the tarantula could like freak out and then just
Okay, so they'll basically just annoy the tarantula then.
This is an adult Venzio parvis. This is as big as they get. And I have sent these out to people, and people have messaged me saying they did not get anything but a cup of dirt because they're so good at mimicking rocks. And these pretty much keep to themselves. They burrow down. But for the most part, I really just encourage people to use Springtails with the tarantulas.
With the tarantulas? Okay. And you said it kind of went out for me, but you said just because of when they're molting, like they can eat that exoskeleton and prevent them from molting correctly?
Well, the tarantulas get so stressed out. Not only are they sensitive and can be eaten during molting because their body is soft, but I accidentally moved one and it just gave up on life because I accidentally moved it.
Huh. Poor thing.
So I can imagine that if they're partway through molting and some isopod minding its own business crawls over the tarantula and it's like, oh no.
Yeah, I don't know anything about tarantulas, but I'm sure there are stressed out ones. So I'm trying to see any other questions. No. And then I always have the guest ask the next guest a question. So what kind of question would you have for the next guest?
Oh goodness, I didn't think this through.
I know it's off the top. She's a vet. I will say that. She's a veterinarian. That I'll give you a little help if you.
What aspect of animal care would you like to see improved in the hobby?
Yeah, I'm having exotics or reptile. She sees all types of exotics, but reptiles too. All right, cool. I don't see any other questions. We're coming up on hour 45, so that's about where I like to kind of keep it. I was like, yeah, you said I asked all the questions, nothing else? want to talk about? How can people find you and reach out to you if they have questions?
I have a Facebook page, an Instagram page. I try to schedule posts just because it's posting doesn't mean I'm active, but I do try to respond to messages as promptly as I can. We're also active on TikTok. I try to go live at least once a day, which is usually pretty chaotic, but it's also quite fun. And my email, you can submit a contact form on the website, or you can just email me directly at info@smug-bug.com.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for everybody who tapped in. This is a great episode. Really thank you for Laura for spending her time with us today, showing the Bioactive setup and all the Isopod she's got. I could tell you really like what you do, and it's made me excited to learn more about it.
I love bugs.
So,
I just love
I
them.
appreciate that. Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and close this out and reach out to you. And thank you very much. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. You have a great day.
Yeah, you too. I'm gonna take you off here. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tapping in. I had a great time. Looking forward to next week's episode. I'll bring on Dr. Danielle Pace, a colleague of mine who I know in vet school. She's going to come on and talk about some reptile healthcare, some stories she's got. You guys can come prepared with questions. And yeah, as far as updates, I'm going to Daytona this coming weekend. I'll fly there Friday, so I may see some of you guys. So if you see me walking around, come up and say hi, introduce yourselves, and looking forward to meeting everybody. So with that, we'll close out here and see you next week.